Welcome to the second day of the 12th Simpósio de Ciência, Tecnologia Ambiental and the second International Conference on Environment Science and Technology. It is a pleasure to have you with us. Now, Professor Cláudia Vittoni will be presenting a lecture entitled Diving into Blue Geotechnics for a New Life to Marine Waste. Professor Cláudia Vittoni obtained her PhD in Geotechnical Engineering at the Politecnico di Bari in 2005. In 2020, she qualified as full professor of geotechnics and became full professor in 2023 at the Politecnico di Bari. She is member of the editorial board of leading journal in the field, such as the Geotechnic and Environmental Geotechnics. She is PI of the Europe research project Green Life for Seas, entitled the development of innovative techniques for the chemical-mechanical treatment of dredged marine sediments for their reuse. Professor Cláudia, welcome to your symposium. You are thankful for having you here. I wish everyone an excellent lecture, and I remind you that it is possible to post questions about in the chat. Professor Eduardo and I will be the moderators and select them to ask in the end. Professor Cláudia, it is a pleasure to share this moment with you, and let's start.
Thank you very much. First of all, do you hear me?
Thanks.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. In Italy now it's 2:00 in the afternoon. However, I'm very happy and thank you for having invited me to this lecture. I will talk about an experience, and I will talk you about a story centered in geotechnical engineering, and in particular on the reuse of marine waste. This lecture is organized in 3 episodes and 2 spin-off series. The first episode is about the sediments, so the marine sediments, which we dredge from our ports. The second episode is about a meeting between sediments and shells. The third one is also the use of biofibers in these mixtures. And then we will talk for a few minutes about pollution and some recent engineering applications. So when this story started because I was probably at the right place at the right time, since I was in 2013, after 8 years from the postdoc, from the doctorate, from the PhD, I became lecturer at the Politecnico di Bari in a town called Taranto. You can see here the Taranto site in the south of Italy. Taranto is very famous in Europe because it hosts a very, very large area of environmental crisis with more or less 200,000 inhabitants at risk because there is a lot of pollution. In particular, we could work in the heart of this area, which is called the Mar Piccolo. Mar Piccolo in Italian means small sea, although this sea is not so small because it's about 20 square kilometers. In this sea, in this area, there are a lot of protected species, a lot of beauty, museums, etc. But at the same time, there is a very big mussel cultivation farm, and there is a lot of industrial pressures, and a lot of pollution. So from the bottom of the Mar Piccolo, of the small sea, we could retrieve a lot of sediments, but these sediments are very complex because of their variable consistency, the presence of organic content, the presence of diatoms, the presence of microfossils and shells, and the presence of a lot of pollutants, heavy metals, kerosene, organic pollutants. This is an example of sediment which is essentially stick together by all this stuff. So essentially, in terms of engineering, due to all this complexity, what we could observe is that the liquidity index, you know that liquidity index is a parameter in geotechnics that if higher than 1 means that the material is liquid. So we were recording liquidity index very high, so 2, 3, even 4, but the material to the naked eye was everything but a liquid material. So it was changed due to these all complexities. So we studied this together with ETH Zurich, and in fact we found essentially, this is reported in this publication, that these complexities and these paradoxes, geotechnical paradoxes, were due to the presence of diatoms sometimes, or the presence of specific types of organic matter. So that's why in some cases these sediments were behaving in a very strange way. So a very complicated geomaterials, but at the same time, marine sediments are highly impacting marine waste. In fact, they represent, in terms of million of tons, the largest waste, marine waste worldwide. 4,000 million tons of sediments are dredged annually every year in the world. In Europe, we dredge more or less 200 million cubic meters of sediments every year. That more or less, just to make you understand the impact of this, is about 10,000 five-story buildings that we dredge from the sea, from the bottom of the seas every year. So a huge amount of material. What we do with this material, which is the fate of the sediments? The fate is sometimes dumping into the sea, but this is essentially implying habitat smothering, oxygen depletion, food chain contamination, and also the landfilling. The landfilling is very, very expensive, and also there are a lot of environmental risks. So, you know, the fate of this material is still an open issue. So we are now studying in these years the other way around. So what to do from these sediments, which are more or less something like this. We are trying to transform this material from a waste to a resource, mixing them with binders, additive, and adsorbents. But the challenge with respect to the existing literature is that we want to do this trying to comply with these two research questions. The first one is that, starting from our expertise on the behavior of sediments, we want to tailor essentially these solutions of treatment on the sediments as they are, so trying to minimize or even avoid any pre-treatment before the mixing. So to work as much as possible, leaving the sediments as they are. And the other challenge is essentially to try to implement solutions which are as green as possible, so trying to minimize the cement content. And now here comes the shells. So now we move to the second episode. Essentially, the shells that were, as I mentioned, very common, that are very common here in Taranto as food, seafood, you know, we have a lot of cultivation, mussel cultivation plants in south of Italy, and Europe is the second worldwide producer. China is the first one. They are a not compostable waste, and they are already reused in Europe in agriculture as animal feed supplement. So the idea was that of essentially mixing the sediment after their integrated characterization, so multi-scale characterization, with a biobinder that we developed through the mixing of the cement with this mussel shell powder after a thermomechanical treatment. So essentially, this mussel shell powder is allowing us to reduce the content of cement. We tested a lot these solutions, we patented the methodology, we realized a lot of tests in this respect to obtain this stabilized material. Some details about the mussel shell powder: heating at 100 degrees for 48 hours, the D50 is 6 microns, and essentially we could check the efficiency of the solution with different cements. So which is the rationale behind this research? What we did was that of comparing standard mixtures, so control mixtures, obtained by mixing just the sediment with the cement, different cement, Portland, steel slag cement, and a sulfoluminate cement. So these control mixtures and their mechanical behavior has been compared with that of new mixtures, innovative mixtures, where part of the cement was replaced by this mussel shell powder, so here in light blue. So we tested and we compared the behavior between the control mixtures and these mixtures, including less cement, but in place of cement, the mussel shell powder and the sediments. We will essentially focus on these two cements due to lack of time. Starting from the sediment was taken at the beginning just from one site, the site of Taranto. This is a typical representation of marine sediment with a bimodal pore size distribution, a high activity soil. Essentially, this is a clay silt with the medium activity, quite high plasticity, a normally compression soil, essentially, with a quite good friction angle, to be honest. In this case, the sediment was not pollutant neither for heavy metals or organic materials. So these are first results of odometer tests in the void ratio vertical effective stress plot. Here you can see this is the natural sediment. And you can see here the result of the mixtures, just the control mixtures. So these are sediments and the cement, different cements. So in yellow is the steel slag, in gray and black the Portland, and in green the sulfoluminate. You can see here, first of all, that the treatment is working well because we have, differently from the natural sediment, a pre-yielding behavior, then we have the yielding, and then we have the normal compression behavior. Here, this is the virgin compression line. So we have a yielding due to the chemical reactions. But this is not the case for the sulfoluminate, which was not working essentially. But instead, both the Portland and the steel slag was working very well. And this is what happens when we replace essentially to the cement, part of the cement, the mussel shell powder. You can see already here that the behavior is extremely similar in one-dimensional compression behavior. These are instead some results of unconfined compression tests, where when you see the red contour means the mixtures where the cement has been replaced by the shell powder. As you can see here, compared to the control mixtures, the gray, the black, the yellow, the mixtures including shell powder with low cement, so in place of 16% of cement, we have 12 plus 4, we have a very similar strength, sometimes even higher. Here we have again odometer test in the void ratio vertical effective stress plot. This is the natural sediment. This is the control mixtures with the ordinary Portland, with the cement and cement, 8%. The black is 16%, the gray is 8%, and you can see now the red contour means the new solutions that essentially are quite similar. Essentially, it's very good, the result. And this is, the story practically is the same if we use the steel slag cement, that is a greener one solution. So essentially, the take-home evidences in all this stuff is essentially that we have a very good performance of the new mixtures because we are recording comparable compression, behavior, and strength after 28 days, and in particular, when we replace 1/3 in terms of ratio between the mussel shell powder and the cement. Essentially, they are behaving still as a soil, and in particular during triaxial, but also unconfined compression strength. So now the question is why? Why this shell powder is working so well? Which is his role? So essentially, you should know that if we mix cement and water and we add, in order to avoid the flash set, the gypsum to form the ettringite, we have first the hydration reactions. So we have calcium silicate hydrates, and these calcium silicate hydrates, when we mix a clay or a fine-grained sediments, are reacting with the silicate and the aluminate within the clay materials, so that we have essentially we have the formation of portlandite. The portlandite here, so the calcium hydroxide, is reacting with silicate and aluminate to form other products of calcium silicate hydrates. So this means that they are occurring pozzolanic reactions. This is a standard behavior, standard chemical reactions. These are standard chemical reactions between cement, water, and fine-grained sediment systems, so without shells. What is going on now? So, which is the role? What happens when we add mussel shell powder? So, to answer this question, we have to enter the mussel shells. So, we enter the mussel shells from an engineering perspective. So, essentially, if we cross a section, if we run a section of a shell, so a mussel shell, from the outside to the inside, we have a periostracum, then we have a prismatic layer in between, and the nacre. As you can see here, the nacre is composed by layers of brick and mortar biostructure, which is made up not only of calcite, but also of aragonite, which has more elongated shape. So we have also between these layers glycoproteins and chitin and organic material, but also we have a form of calcium carbonate, which is a biogenic one, so different from the geogenic calcium carbonate, which is made up not only of calcite, but also of aragonite. So this is, for example, a comparison between calcareous rock of calcite and the mussel shell. You can see here that the specific surface of the shells is about 3 square meter over grams against 1.5 square meters over grams of the limestone. So, you know, we have a higher specific surface, which is that this material is more prone to react in engineering systems, and which means also that it is characterized by lower thermal stability, which if compared to the geogenic one, which is again a good result. If we run MIP tests, so we inject mercury and we try to understand the porosity of this material, and we compare the dredge sediment with the control mixture, and in red, the mixture including also the shell powder with less cement, we observe that the main pore size is reducing, and from a bimodal mode, we are shifting towards a monomodal pore size distribution. Also from the SEM imaging, you can see here the mussel shells, as also confirmed by the elemental analysis. So essentially, here we can probably suspect that the mussel shell powder is pore filling and is also bridging the clay particles in some way. But also it is characterized by higher cation exchange capacity, the mixture with shells, if compared with that that is the control one. So essentially, it seems that mussel shell powder is increasing the electrolyte exchanges among the clay particle in the treated sediments. Other results. This, for example, is a water content through curing time, where we have compared the water content of the mixtures with shells here with that of control mixtures. As you can see here, we have that the water content of the mixtures, including the shell powder, are lower than those of the control mixtures. So this is probably indicating that further hydration reactions are occurring. So this shell powder, although obtained with a very low temperature, so without calcinating the shell powder and the shells, it is having also an active role in these mixtures. And also the pH of the water is suggesting us that there is also an alkaline environment, which is good for the development of pozzolanic reactions. If we look at the literature, where some authors have mixed this shell powder just to cement, so here there are no sediments, and they compared the biogenic calcium carbonate added to ordinary Portland to the geogenic one, they also observed essentially that the biogenic calcium carbonate is acting as nucleator site for hydration products due to the higher specific surface and its metastability, and also at the TEM measurement, so very, very small, very big enlargements, they could also observe some nano-sized cluster, which are suggesting that there is a dissociation between calcium and carbonate, despite the low temperature of preparation of the mussel shell powder. This is a very beautiful image from our microscope. You can see here, this is a Globigerina. The Globigerina is a foraminifera. It has more or less 170 million years ago. So you can think that we, men and women, the first hominids, it's about 20 million years ago. So, inside the Globigerina, you can see here also the CSH honeycomb structure. You can see here also some shell powder in this matrix, and also the Portlandite that is also present. So to sum up, it is the possible model that is explaining why this biogenic calcium carbonate is so effective, is made up of three roles, essentially, main three roles. The first one is filler, because this powder is very fine, so essentially it is likely filling. But not only, because there is also a physical role as a nucleation site increase, and also a chemical one, because as I already explained, due to the alkaline environment induced by the presence of cement, there is a dissociation between calcium and carbonate, and so this promotes further pozzolanic reactions. We are now working with other PhD students trying to explain and quantify the relevance of each of these roles in these mixtures. These are images coming from the synchrotron, European synchrotron in Grenoble. So this video is representing essentially a specimen which is here. So essentially the thickness is that of one hair. So it's 0.3 millimeters, so very, very small specimen. The synchrotron is one of the largest microscopes in the world. So now let's move to the third episode, where we have added the biofibers. Essentially, the protagonist of this story is our PhD student, Jafar Karimiazar. We are working with Professor Romero from UPC in this respect. The specific goal of the PhD by Jafar is to study the mechanical effects of the addition of biofibers of Posidonia oceanica and the interactions with atmospheres of these new systems. I will show just few results. First of all, I don't know if you have in Brazil the Posidonia oceanica, but we have our shorelines are full of these balls and leaves of Posidonia oceanica, and they are essentially a waste. These balls are made up of needles. And these balls, the scientific name is Egagrophiles. They are formed because the leaves, the sheets, the rhizomes are transported by the currents over the shorelines, and these balls are forming essentially due to the kinematic and the kinematism of the waves, and so they are essentially created and become some balls on the already floating in the sea and then arrive to the shoreline. These balls are made up, so the Egagrophiles are essentially part of a seagrass composed by hemicellulose, cellulose, and lignin. And we have in the Mediterranean about 5 million tons of Posidonia oceanica. and they are currently landfilled. So first of all, we started from the scratch. So what we did at the beginning was that to put these fibers in the water. They were floating at the beginning. Then after some minutes or 2 days at the end, we could observe and we could monitor that they were going down, they were soaking. They were soaking in particular when they were in tap water, but in salt water, so in seawater, the soaking was a bit slowed down. So this could suggest, this already suggested to us that they were porous in some way. So are hygroscopic, and water salinity is slowing down the process. So what Jafar did was that of studying these fibers in two conditions, an air drying condition and a pre-soaking condition. And also we had the opportunity to go to Grenoble in France in the synchrotron to observe and to do some tomography at a very high resolution of this single fiber. So we put a single needle of Posidonia in these glass needles, very, very thin. And this job was carried out with Professor Giacchino Viggiani and also Gustavo Pinzon, which was working there at the time. And these are the first images of a single needle of Posidonia. You can see the structure with these lumens inside, and these are two small videos showing you essentially these lumens are these colored lines, and in two conditions. On the left, the pre-soaking condition, so after soaking. On the right, after just air drying. The images are very similar, and also we could calculate this difference. And in fact, from the calculation obtained from the videos and the images on the synchrotron, we could observe that essentially the porosity in the two conditions is very similar. And also this porosity calculated from the synchrotron is also not so different from that we calculated using analytical relations for standard porous materials. Then we have in the two conditions, so for just pre-soaked fibers and just air-dried fibers, we could perform some tensile tests. As you can see here, irrespective of what we have seen in the synchrotron, where essentially the images and the porosity is similar, but the behavior under tension of the single fiber is very different, because if the fiber is air dried, we have that the tensile stress is much higher than the pre-soaked fiber, and the elongation is much lower. So another point was that of trying to select the length of these fibers. Since these are not artificial fibers, so we could not pre-select the fibers, it is very important to have the possibility to select some length, because we have to avoid the clustering of the fibers. So what we did was to open these balls. So you can see here, this is one ball of 25 millimeters diameter, more or less opened. And this is another ball of 60 millimeter diameter open. We can scan these fibers, and then we have run some analysis to try to understand if there was a correlation between the diameter of the sphere and the average length. Essentially, as you can see, the correlation is very good, in particular when you use MATLAB. And what does it mean? This means that by just selecting the sphere diameter, we could have an idea of the average length. Then we went in deep, because we also have understood that there is also a correlation between a group of fiber length. So now, after having had an idea of what a fiber means, Posidonia oceanica fibers, now we could add the fibers to the mixtures. So what we did was always the same. So we started from the control mixtures with sediment and just cement. Here we used the steel slag cement. Then we have prepared also the mixtures with cement, sediment, and shell powder. So 16 in the control mixtures, here means 12 plus 4, 32 means essentially 24 plus 8. And in this case, we added 1% of fibers, 1% of dry fibers or pre-soaked fibers, air-dried or pre-soaked. We tested both the conditions. So now let's have a look to some of the results. These are results of unconfined compression strength. These in black is the control mixtures with 16% of cement, and in gray this is the mixture where the cement has been replaced by the shell powder. Again, you can see here with the Taranto sediment that we have a similar behavior. If we add the fibers, what we are obtaining is a mixture with similar strength, in particular with air-dried fibers, but higher ductility post-peak. This is likely due to the bridging effect that you can see here, the fibers that are essentially acting as bridges at the multiple scale, both at the scale of the element volume at the laboratory, at the scale of the centimeter that we can see to the naked eye, and at the scale of the microscope. These are consolidated and drained triaxial tests, and again you can see here a result in the QP- plot of the control mixture and the mixtures with the fibers and the shell that is essentially behaving in a similar way. These are again odometer tests. Again, you can see that with shells and fiber, the story is still the same, and also the correlations with the literature data working on essentially traditional mixtures with the cement or lime and clays, and are essentially in the cone of the literature with these mixtures. Now some splitting tests. So if these fibers are also working in and so improving the mixtures during splitting tests. We have tested 3 different conditions, but we will focus on just wet curing and fast drying. In particular, fast drying was carried out leaving the mixtures for 4 days at relative humidity 55%. This is the water loss plotted against the elapsed time. The equalization criteria was essentially the water loss that has to become lower than 1%, so we could wait 4 days. If we cumulate the water loss, we obtain also an interesting result, because as you can see here, we have the maximum water loss is recorded for the mixtures including the pre-soaked fibers. Instead, the lowest one is obtained for the mixtures with the shells, the shell powder and the cement and the sediment. So this means that when we use the shell powder alone, water essentially is entrapped in the mixtures. Whereas when we add the fibers are essentially bridging, connecting the mixtures to the atmosphere much more. When we perform fast drying, we have, before splitting, we could observe desiccation cracks. But again, the desiccation cracks, these are images of the specimens after the 4 days of fast drying, you can see that essentially these desiccation cracks are very huge for the control mixtures, but if we add the fibers, in particular the pre-soaked one, we do not even see anymore the cracking. And this is also reflected in higher tensile stress when we had the fibers, since the material was practically almost not cracked. Instead, as you can see here, on the very cracked, highly cracked material, that is the one with the cement and sediment, we have also lower tensile stress. If we compare after the tensile stress results, the tensile test results after fast drying with those after wet curing, where we couldn't see any visible crack to the naked eye, we have quite similar results. And what is very interesting is that also under tension, we have very huge post-peak ductility when we add fibers here in red and in blue. Now, the two spin-off series. So what happens if we have pollution? It is very well known in the literature that cement stabilization can help polluted clay soils, because essentially cement is acting using by means of various mechanisms which are essentially depending also on the different cations, because we have physical encapsulation, we have precipitation, which is very common, for example, for lead. We have substitution, adsorption. So we have a lot of processes which cement can induce. The addition of cement can induce also just for reduce the pollution in the sediments. But also from the literature in the agricultural world, we find also the efficacy of the shell powder in the wastewater treatments, since the shell powder has been observed to be very effective to activate several processes to block the contaminants, in particular heavy metals, due to different processes again, so surface complexation, ion exchange, electrostatic attraction, etc. And in particular, from a comparison between the shell powder and the limestone, we see, for example, that there is even more efficacy if we use the biogenic calcium carbonate, so the shells, because of the brick and mortar layers of this structure. So what we did essentially was that to try if these solutions are also effective for contaminated sediments. So in order to work with controlled environment, we have added lead and kerosene to the sediments. So we created essentially polluted sediments artificially. And then we have mixed these polluted sediments either with just cement for the control mixtures or with cement partially replaced with the mussel shell powder. But also we have tried to add the biochar, which is a common adsorbent, to try to see if there is a boosting of this absorption capacity. So now we will just focus on the Portland cement and just a few words about also the other cement. So these are, again, odometer tests in the void ratio vertical effective stress plot, so one-dimensional compression. This is the natural sediment here, dashed line in gray. The black line is the lead polluted sediment. As you can see here, we have quite similar behavior for the control mixtures. The mixture with just shells and cement, and the mixture when we have added also the biochar. So essentially we have a pre-yield and a post-yield, so the mechanical stabilization is still working. In terms of unconfined compression strength, you can observe here that the control mixture now for the polluted sediment, the lead polluted sediment, is performing a bit better than the one with the shells. But we have an increase of strength for longer curing time. So we should wait any more than 60 days to see how the story is ending. On the chemical side, the leaching tests instead are very interesting here, because you can see here that if compared after 20 days with the control mixture, this is the control mixture, so cement and sediment, the new mixtures are, so if we implement the shell powder is entrapping the lead in some way. So we have that after 60 days, we are below the landfill threshold, and more or less, when we add biochar, of course, the solution is working even better. But what is happening if we work with different cements? So in yellow is essentially the steel slag cement. This is the content of lead from the leaching test. In gray, the ordinary Portland, and this is the sulfo-aluminate. As you can see here, this is the effect of the addition of mussel shell powder to our mixture. So if we add mussel shell powder and we reduce the content of cement, we have a reduction of lead. So the mussel shell powder is entrapping again for all the cements, essentially. With curing time, so if we wait until 60 days, we have essentially that the Portland is also working very well with shell powder, but we have also an efficacy that is boosted if we add biochar. The consistency index of the different cements is again showing that the behavior is almost similar practically. The only cement that is not working very well is the sulfoluminate, because as I mentioned, the sulfoluminate is not performing very well in terms of mechanics, because probably this is probably due to the presence of a lot of sulfate within the sulfoluminate mix design of the cement. But on the other side, we can see that the sulfoluminate cement is performing very well in absorbing the pollution. If we plot the lead versus the pH, we have a quite common trend that is already recorded in the literature, with essentially higher efficacy for pH that are about 10. So now we are going on in this respect with another PhD work from Martina Carcagni. Martina essentially is here working, trying to chemomechanically modify the shell powder using a vinegar treatment and another thermomechanical treatment to obtain what we call soft calcite, which is essentially pure calcite, this one on the right, bottom right side, with the quite higher specific surface than the mussel shell powder. Here you can see in comparison the mussel shell powder that I presented before so far, and this new product that is obtained trying to isolate the needles of calcite. So if we now also compare the behavior of mussel shells and soft calcite, but also the manila clam shells and the oyster shells and the powders obtained with this thermomechanical treatment, and we mix just the shell powder with the sediment, so without cement, this is just a chemical adsorbance for lead. This is the lead polluted sediment. So this is just the sediment. This is sediment polluted plus 8% of Portland. And here you can see essentially what is going on if to the lead sediment we just add the shell powders. As you can see here, the concentration of lead is much reduced, so the shell powders are working very well. If we wait for longer curing times, so up to 90 days, we have practically that the soft calcite is lowering the concentration of lead so at very, very low levels, so that essentially the material could be ready to be reused. This work is, of course, still ongoing. Now, let's move to the last part of this presentation, that is about recent engineering application. As during the presentation was mentioned this European LIFE project, which is called Green Life for Seas. I am the principal investigator of this process, which is lasting 5 years. The Green Life for Seas is the acronym of Green Engineering Solutions, a New Life for Sediments and Shells. If you scan the QR, you can enter the web page of the project. The project is founded on a triple helix model, essentially, which is also now becoming a quadruple helix. But the partnership is composed by universities and research institutions in Italy. Then we have 3 companies and also 4 ports, essentially. The Port Authority of Bari, which is including the ports of Bari and Barletta, the Port Authority of La Spezia, here in the north of Italy, and the Piraeus Port in Athens, in Greece. The project is also essentially involving a lot of other universities, and also the UFFS university is part of the project in the extended network, as you can see here. But essentially, the project is going on, gathering a lot of attention, and it's a very huge challenge. But I think that we are in a quite good shape so far. Which is the project layout? We are starting sampling the sediments from the 4 ports. And we are working in the laboratories of different towns, of different university and research centers, to try to first characterize the sediments. So the multi-scale characterization of the sediments is the first step. And then we are tailoring the mix design because we want to realize some prototypes in situ. Prototypes of pavements, of outdoor pavements blocks, some physical models to be put into some tanks and to be studied, and also breakwaters. Essentially, what the aim and the goal of the project is the upscaling, because we are moving from the laboratory scale to the in situ scale through the realization of 2 prototypal plants. The first plant is essentially a plant that is now ready, that is going to realize the mussel shell powder at the in situ scale. The plant here below is instead a mobile plant that will go from one port to another port to mix directly in the port areas the dredged sediments with these shell powders and the cement to realize this product that will be put directly in place in the port areas as demonstrative areas. So now there are now ongoing these first dredging activities and the integrated characterization of the sediments, which means not only geotechnical investigations, but also chemical, biochemical, mineralogical, ecotoxicological investigations. Of course, as this is the work of Martie is working on this, Martie Chianime, she is characterizing the sediments, in particular from a geotechnical point of view. You can see here the results of the sediments, which span from silty clays to clay silts to silty sands, etc., with also variable content of organic matter, and they span in the Casagrande's plasticity chart from a very high plasticity to a medium-low plasticity. If we look at some results, if we fix the water-to-binder ratio after 28 days, the oedometer test of different sediments from different port sites, these are different sediments, you can see here that the dashed lines means the solutions with the shell powder. These continuous lines mean the solutions without shell powder, so the control solution. Again, you see that there is a very good performance of the solutions, including the shell powder. And also during unconfined compression test, we have a peak strength that is of the dashed lines that is similar, even sometimes even higher than that of the continuous and the control mixture solutions. So now we are realizing the first prototypes of pavers, of pavements. So we started from mimicking, copying commercial pavements. The commercial pavements are those that you can see here. This is a standard company. They are essentially made up normally of 100% of primary materials. So sand, fine gravel, cement, and water. And they have to comply with this standard, essentially. So what we did was, of course, to replace these primary materials with our materials. So dredged sediments, the cement, which is, as you will see, in a very few percentage, few amount, mussel shell powder, and also sand. Then, in order to reduce the content of primary materials, we tried also to replace the sand with this shell aggregate, which that we have, of course, tailored in order to be effective in replacement of the sand. And we obtained these essentially prototypes of first pavements. This is part of the work of Pravendra, our PhD student, who is working with these products. As you can see here, we have compared the master shell aggregate performance with that of the natural sand. We had to also calibrate the grain size distribution. We have characterized the performance, the chemomechanical performance of the bricks of the new pavements, and this is just one result from Pravendra. Now there is also Hossein Sadiki, which is now starting on this. As you can see here, we have in this plot, we have compressive strength here. We have different sediments. So in blue, the sediment from Bari. In green, the sediments from Barletta Port, which is essentially a sand, and the Taranto material. The Taranto material is a silty clay. The Barletta sediment is a sandy, is a clay sand, and the Bari sediment is essentially a silty clay. So totally different material, 3 different sediments in their natural state. We mixed this sediment following specific mix design and changing also the ratios between the dry aggregate and the sand, essentially quindi the shell aggregate and the cement. And as you can see here, if we have the yellow contour, we have sand. If we have the black contour, we have shell aggregate. Essentially, sand is working better. But if we wait for longer curing time, so 60 days, you can see, for example, that this mixture, which is characterized by a mix design that is essentially made up of 40% of bulk sediment, then 10% more or less of marine water, shell aggregate. So all this is secondary material. The shell powder is secondary material. Only the cement is 16-17% of cement in the brick. But we are already having very good result because the compression strength is 16 megapascal against the 20 that is suggested by the codes, the standards, and the indirect tensile strength is 2.7 against the 3.5 of the standards. So we have in our bricks just 24% maximum of primary material against the 76 that is waste. So now we are going on, we are realizing the first breakwaters, and we are trying to develop some prediction models. It's time to conclude. Sorry if I bothered you, and these are just some take-home messages. So first of all, this shell biobinder seems to be a promising material for the mechanical improvement of dredge sediments, but I would say also in general to clays. The chemical efficacy is also quite good. The biofibers can improve ductility, but also they boost the atmospheric interactions, although depending on their initial conditions, if dried or pre-soaked. The real scale applications of breakwaters and pavement are providing interesting results. Of course, further research is needed. Just to mention something, we have to deepen our knowledge on physical and chemical processes behind this recorded mechanical and chemical efficacy, but also we have now to focus on the optimization of the results and to focus on some longer term duration of the solutions. So I show you the cast of this story, and also this is made up of professors, colleagues, PhD students, etc. And also there is this picture that is also including the QR code of the project. I concluded. So
Thank you, Claudia. Congratulations for the lecture, Professor Claudia. Now we have questions done by the participants in the chat. I'm gonna to read the first question. Here the question by Maria Alice Piovesan.
Sorry, I am old, so I have to wear glasses. I don't see okay yet.
Okay, that's okay. Questions by Maria Alice Piovesan. Congratulations on your outstanding work in this field, Claudia. Does the presence of aragonite influence the development and long-term durability of these new materials, semi-materials?
Yes, Maria Alice, this is a very, very good question. So thank you. Yes, you have centered one of the key points. The peculiar composition of this biogenic source of calcium carbonate, which lays also in the presence of aragonite, is acting and boosting all the reactions. So yes, probably yes. We are not completely sure, but all the tests that we are running these years are confirming this, because the aragonite is metastable with respect of calcite and the specific surface is higher. So yes.
Yes, that's okay. Thank you. The next question now is by Mariana Krogel. No, Daniel Galliano. Daniel Galliano. Sorry. Yeah. Congratulations, Claudia. Due to the large variation in the ocean salinity, both geographically and in deep, is there any type of test for cement with shells that relates to salinity and deep conditions?
Okay. To be honest, so far, we have tested sediments coming from areas spanning from the southern Mediterranean again to the Adriatic Sea. So we didn't test North Sea or Baltic Sea sediments. So I'm not sure about that, but I don't think that this would dramatically change the story. However, for applications like materials like reefs, for example, in that case, we need to test the compatibility and the consistency with also very different environmental conditions. Yes.
Okay. Now, next questions by Mariana Krogel. Claudia, when you mention the formation of nano-sized clusters from the partial dissolution of calcium carbonate, could these products be considered as alternative nanomaterials?
Honestly, this is not properly my field, my research field. They are nanomaterials in the sense that the size is there, is the nanometric size. There is a decomposition probably. So I don't know. But essentially, this has been recorded. So there is a decomposition, and this decomposition is induced not by thermal decomposition, so a thermal dissociation of calcium carbonate, but probably is likely induced by the alkaline environment due to the presence of cement. So it is a specific production obtained in that condition.
Yes. Mariana, have you studied this issue in your dissertation? Is a good question. Next question is by Arthur Sescon. Congratulations on your great presentation, Claudia. How effectively do alternative cements encapsulate contaminants present in waste-based materials in marine environments? I think so. Other contaminants besides metals.
Okay. Okay, we have tested their capacity in lowering the pollution also for kerosene. So for kerosene, we could see that there is an efficacy also. So for lead and kerosene, we have good results. For other type of contaminants, I don't know, we should check. So
Okay. And
I could not show kerosene due to time constraints, but yes, the first results and also the second results on kerosene are very good.
That's okay. Thank you, Claudia. Thank you for sending questions. Thank you all for sending questions. And we could have more questions, but don't have time anymore. This lecture was excellent, Professor Claudia.
Grazie a
I
voi.
thank you indeed. I thank you indeed for enhancing our event and sharing your scientific expertise. For me, it's a pleasure have you with us. And I wish you success in your project and our project.
Yes,
And
I hope to collaborate further with you because, you know, I think that from collaboration, only from collaboration can have birth new ideas and new outcomes, real outcomes. So thank you for your invitation.
yes, thank you for this opportunity. And I think I invite you to join us to other activities at night. At night at 7 p.m. We have other lecture to our event. Thank you.
Okay. Ciao.
Thank you. Bye
Thank
bye.
you. Bye. Bye.